The bride was shaking in the snow, her white dress thin against the bitter cold, her wheelchair stuck in ice, and the man running toward her was not her groom. The only soul standing between her and the darkness closing in was a tired single father and his loyal dog. In that frozen forest clearing, fate was rewriting 3 lives at once. If you believe kindness still exists in this world, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Because stories like this remind us that one small act can change everything. Daniel Harper had not planned to be anyone's hero that afternoon. He was simply trying to survive another long day. Since his wife had passed away 3 years earlier, it had been just him and his 6-year-old son, Ethan. Life had become a careful balancing act between construction jobs, unpaid bills, and bedtime stories whispered through exhaustion. The only steady companion in his life was Max, his German shepherd, a retired service dog he had adopted from a shelter when he could barely afford dog food. Max had become more than a pet. He was a silent guardian for Daniel and Ethan, a steady presence in a world that kept shifting beneath their feet. That day, Daniel had taken a shortcut through a snow-covered back road after finishing a late shift. Ethan was staying with a neighbor, and Daniel wanted to get home quickly before the temperature dropped further. The forest road was quiet, wrapped in white silence, when Max suddenly began barking from the passenger seat. Not the playful bark Daniel knew, but sharp, urgent, insistent. Daniel slowed the truck, scanning the road ahead. That was when he saw her. A woman in a wedding dress sat in a wheelchair near the edge of the snowy clearing, her arms wrapped around herself, her face pale and streaked with tears. Behind her stood a blue SUV with its driver's side door open, and running toward her from deeper in the woods was a man whose expression was twisted with anger and desperation. Daniel didn't think. He stepped out of his truck, snow crunching beneath his boots, and Max leaped out beside him, standing tall and alert. The woman's eyes met Daniel's, wide with fear and silent pleading. The man behind her shouted something that the wind swallowed, but his movements were aggressive, frantic. Daniel's heart pounded. He wasn't rich, powerful, or influential. He was just a father who knew what fear looked like. He had seen it in Ethan's eyes the night his mother didn't come home from the hospital, and he would never ignore that look again. Max moved first, positioning himself between the woman and the approaching man, his body rigid, teeth slightly bared. Daniel stepped forward, placing himself beside the wheelchair. The man slowed, startled by the sudden intervention. The tension in the air felt like glass about to shatter. The man muttered threats, accusing the bride of ruining everything, of embarrassing him, of destroying his future. Daniel didn't argue, he simply stood firm. Sometimes courage is not loud. Sometimes it is just refusing to step aside. The confrontation ended when the man, frustrated and humiliated, retreated to his vehicle and sped away, tires spraying snow behind him. The forest fell silent again, but the silence felt different now. Fragile, human. Daniel knelt beside the woman and gently freed her wheelchair from the ice. Up close, he could see that she was younger than he first thought, perhaps in her late 20s, her makeup smudged, her hands trembling uncontrollably. She explained through broken breaths that her fiancé had left her there after an argument. She had discovered something about him, something dishonest, something unforgivable, and when she confronted him, he had driven her out of town in anger, abandoning her in the cold to teach her a lesson. Daniel felt a familiar ache in his chest. Life had taught him how quickly love could turn into loss. He helped her into his truck, wrapped her in his spare jacket, and turned up the heat. Max rested his head gently on her knee as if he understood she needed comfort. She stroked his fur with shaking fingers, tears flowing silently. Her name was Isabella Laurent. Daniel drove her to the nearest hospital to ensure she was safe. He waited in the hallway long after the doctors had taken her inside. He didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't expect anything. When Isabella was stable, she asked him to stay a little longer. She told him she had been paralyzed in an accident years ago, that she had built her life back from nothing, that she thought she had finally found someone who loved her beyond her wheelchair. Instead, she had almost lost her life in a forest because of misplaced trust. Daniel listened without judgment. He shared his own story quietly about losing his wife, about raising Ethan alone, about the nights when he pretended to be strong so his son would not see him break. Two strangers, both wounded by love, finding unexpected comfort in honesty. Before he left, Isabella asked for his name and number. Daniel hesitated, unused to people needing him beyond a construction site or a school pickup. But he wrote it down anyway and walked out into the freezing night, Max trotting faithfully beside him. Weeks passed. Daniel returned to his routine of early mornings and late nights. Bills piled up again. His truck needed repairs he couldn't afford. Ethan's school had sent home a notice about overdue fees. Daniel never mentioned Isabella to anyone. He assumed she had returned to her world, wherever that was, and that their lives would never intersect again. Then one afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up outside his small house. Daniel stepped onto the porch, confused. A woman in a tailored coat stepped out, her hair styled elegantly, her posture confident. It took him a moment to recognize her without the wedding dress and tears. Isabella Laurent was not just a bride abandoned in the snow. She was the sole heir and CEO of a global tech investment firm worth billions. The man who had left her in the forest had been after her fortune, and the moment she had discovered his deceit, she had chosen to walk away from him, even if it meant being left behind. She had spent weeks searching for Daniel, not to repay him with money out of obligation, but because his simple act of courage had reminded her that goodness still existed. She had investigated his life quietly and learned about his struggles, his son, his sacrifices. What Isabella offered next was not charity. She offered partnership. She wanted to fund a community project in Daniel's town, building accessible housing and job programs for single parents and people with disabilities. She wanted Daniel to oversee it, to become the director of something meaningful. She believed that someone who risked himself for a stranger in the snow would protect a community with the same heart. Daniel felt overwhelmed. He had never imagined stepping into boardrooms instead of construction sites. But when he looked at Ethan watching from the doorway, hope shining in his young eyes, he realized this was not just about money. It was about legacy. Over the next year, their lives transformed. The small town gained new opportunities. Families found safe homes. People who once felt invisible were given dignity and purpose. Daniel grew into a leader, guided not by ambition but by empathy. Isabella found in him